the Russians are really going to be at the horns of dilemma if and when the Ukrainians reach the Sea of Azov. Because once they cut Crimea off, that means the Russians are going to have a terrible logistics problem in trying to keep those troops, those forces that remained in Crimea, supplied. And, the Russians have seriously got to be thinking, do we keep our troops there? Is it worth defending, to the last man, so to speak? Or do we pull out and do have some resistance, but get the majority of our forces out of there? Because I think once they get in there, and if they get cut off, they're lost. They're lost to the Russian ability to go on the offense, which, they keep talking about, but they haven't shown us that here in months and months. So this is the Russians really have a very tough operational quandary to try to figure themselves through. And it's to the Ukrainian advantage to keep hammering these positions in Crimea that just make it harder and harder for the Russians to come to some type of reasonable conclusion is what the best way forward is.
Discuss what's going on in Ukraine and Russia as a top commander in Russia's Black Sea Fleet, who Ukraine said had been killed in a cruise missile strike in occupied Crimea last week, appears to have taken part in a meeting with Russia's defense minister. Ukrainian special forces claimed that up to 34 officers, including Admiral Viktor Sokolov, had died in the attack in the port city of Sevastopol on Friday. Russia's military had initially said that only one serviceman had died, but later added that the person was missing. However, today, Russia's defense ministry published photographs and a video that seemed to show Sokolov participating in an online meeting with Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister, and other officials. Well, Colonel Brendan Kearney, the military affairs analyst and former chief of staff for the US Marine Corps forces in Europe, joins us. Brendan, good evening to you.
Hello, Rick. Good to talk to you.
This is a bit of a mystery, this one, because it seems both the Russians and the Ukrainians have been giving misinformation on the topic.
Yeah, again, and you and I tend to talk about mysterious things, so this is another one. You're exactly right. It could be something as simple as the Ukrainians made a mistake and Sokolov was not killed. Maybe wasn't even in the building. We don't know yet. It could be Russian disinformation. And taking a look at that video, he and the other admirals shown.
He doesn't speak. He doesn't speak. Yeah.
And it is no technical challenge to people who are adept at video and computers to be able to go ahead and jury rig this thing. And finally, the other option is, Rick, we may be witnessing a miracle, and that Sokolov has been raised from the dead. But I kind of doubt that one.
It's more likely options 1 or 2 then, because
yes, I think so.
Yeah, because the death of Sokolov, who's in his early 60s, it would have been a significant blow, wouldn't it, to the Kremlin? I mean, he served in senior positions in the Navy for 2 decades. He had a stint as deputy commander of the Northern Fleet in the Russian military. He was also involved in combat in Syria. I mean, he's been around.
He is. He's well respected. He seemingly had quite a good operational head on his shoulders. It's my understanding is that he had actually entered into retirement and was called back from retirement to take over the Black Sea Fleet after Putin fired the previous commander after the disastrous sinkings that occurred here earlier this year. So Sokolov appears to be a tactician, a good naval officer, and again, the guys you respect are the ones that seemingly are at sea and learning their craft. The ones that aren't worth respecting, and this is across the board in all militaries, are the ones where you find out they've been the aide to this or they've spent most of their time, behind a desk. That doesn't seem to be the case with Sokolov. So If he is dead, it will be a loss for the Russian military. And the other aspect is, if the casualty count is what the Ukrainians claim it is, in terms of a total of 34 senior officers and hundreds wounded, that really is taking the head off of Russian naval command in the Black Sea. And I'm sure some of these officers would have been some of the best Russia had, because it's where combat is being fought right now. So this could have a significant long-term impact on the Russian Navy. Again, if it's proven out, we simply don't know if the Ukrainian claim is totally true, partially true, or not true. And only time will tell.
Yeah, well, with 34 is the claim from the Ukrainians, one from the Russians, who later said that person was simply missing. Let's discuss, though, the significance of this strike, because a lot was talked about it when it happened, and I just wonder, a few days on, how we take all that in, because Sevastopol is a port city on the Black Sea in Crimea, Russian-occupied Crimea, taken by the Russians by force in 2014. However, Sevastopol was always rented from the Ukrainians for money. They paid the Ukrainians to use it as a warm sea port due to a lack of warm sea ports that the Russians actually had. So, Brendan, the fact that they actually managed to hit targets in there, evading Russian defense, was quite remarkable in the first place.
It really is. And you can't understate, the abilities of the Russians to go ahead and have among the most sophisticated integrated air defense systems in the world. And certainly some of that was and does surround Sevastopol. The other side of that, B, is you have to hand it to the Ukrainians, because what they have done is they have carefully analyzed what the Russian defenses were and found a weakness. And that weakness is what the Storm Shadow, with its 450-kilogram warhead, which is big by any stretch of the imagination, was able to exploit, and being able to penetrate those air defenses and take out that, the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet. It is quite an achievement. And I personally would take my hats off and tip it to the Ukrainian missileers, their Air Force, their intelligence community, all of them together, put together a plan. They executed it beautifully, and the results are what we've seen on some photos. That building was devastated. It'd be hard put for anybody to survive getting a hit like that.
Well, let's talk more about the Storm Shadow, exactly what it is, because it looks like it may have been supplied by the British.
It's a British weapon. It's a British-designed weapon. It's actually a couple decades old. It is currently not state-of-the-art technology.
I think the French also have a similar weapon, though, don't they? Which is why there was some confusion as to whether or not it was supplied by the British or the French, I thought.
That's exactly right. But I think everything, the consensus that we're seeing here in the United States is this was the Storm Shadow.
Right.
Now, all these type of missiles, remotely piloted vehicles, they all have these airframes that seemingly don't change much. And of course, the real key to the brains of these aircraft is the software, and they are subject to continuous improvement. So that aircraft, that missile, could very well be an old airframe with say a slightly upgraded engine to it, but having the best in terms of its ability to fly to the target, identify the target, and then go in for a target kill. So, again, it's got a 560-kilometer range. So that's significant. And the Ukrainians have got their own territory. This can also be launched from an aircraft. So you can get it out into the Black Sea and maybe come in from a direction the Russians might not have really looked at as being a threat. So it's a heck of a technical achievement, and the Ukrainians have shown again and again and again that they take existing weapon systems and make them better with Ukrainian technology, Ukrainian know-how.
Do you think that we're going to see a ramping up of attacks specifically on Crimea by the Ukrainians? Because they've long been pleading, haven't they, for these, the best called ATACMS missile, ATACMS, ATACMS, but from the US, which should allow it to hit deep into Russian-occupied territory, targeting supply lines, ammunition stores, control, command locations. If they get more of these, will we see more attacks on Crimea specifically?
Oh, I think so. They're enjoying success with these type of attacks. And the thing we have to realize is that the Russians are really going to be at the horns of dilemma if and when the Ukrainians reach the Sea of Azov. Because once they cut Crimea off, that means the Russians are going to have a terrible logistics problem in trying to keep those troops, those forces that remained in Crimea, supplied. And, the Russians have seriously got to be thinking, do we keep our troops there? Is it worth defending, to the last man, so to speak? Or do we pull out and do have some resistance, but get the majority of our forces out of there? Because I think once they get in there, and if they get cut off, they're lost. They're lost to the Russian ability to go on the offense, which, they keep talking about, but they haven't shown us that here in months and months. So this is the Russians really have a very tough operational quandary to try to figure themselves through. And it's to the Ukrainian advantage to keep hammering these positions in Crimea that just make it harder and harder for the Russians to come to some type of reasonable conclusion is what the best way forward is.
Yeah, and it looks like the supply of missiles, specifically from the US, is going to continue from President Biden, certainly in the next couple of months. The Washington Post tonight, citing sources familiar with the plan, said Ukraine was likely to receive a version of ATACMS armed with cluster bomblets rather than a single warhead, the former being more plentiful in US stockpiles. So Biden currently not holding back on his supply because he had been relatively cautious for a few months, hadn't he?
Oh, he was very, very resistant to giving the Ukrainians the ATACMS system. The problem is the ATACMS for the United States military and for Ukraine indirectly is that the ATACMS fell out of production here a number of years ago.
Oh, really?
And to start that
I see.
Yeah, to start that type of production line back up again would be a very, very significant effort.
So this is all stock. This is all stock being sent, then, basically. This
is coming from war stocks, and there were never that many of them to begin with. So a lot of the folks like myself who study this for a living, we may emotionally be on the side of giving this to the Ukrainians because it's the right thing to do. But the practicality side comes in when you say to yourself, okay, we can give them to them, but how many can we give? Because we face threats around the world. I'm sure there's a large ATACMS stockpile in South Korea, but we're not gonna let that drop down because we just don't know what. Yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. That DMZ.
Yeah, or Taiwan potentially as well.
Yeah,
great to speak to you as ever. I think we're going to be talking a lot more about ATACMS. Probably a word that most people have not heard of, me included, till a couple of weeks ago. But I'm sure it's going to come up more and more. Brendan, always good to speak to you. Thank you.
All right, Rick. Until next time.
Until next time, definitely. Colonel Brendan Kearney, fantastic military affairs analyst to speak to in detail, in depth, really getting underneath the skin of what's going on in Ukraine. Fantastic to get his insight there. He's the former chief of staff for US Marine Corps forces in Europe, and great to have him on Times Radio tonight.